But we're glad that you're here. And we've been talking about, the last couple of weeks, about assuming responsibility. What it means to assume responsibility. And I came across a principle, and I actually asked somebody to help demonstrate this a little bit too late, and that's my fault. So I know nothing about science. There was another person I was thinking about asking who knows a lot more about science, but maybe you've heard of the Archimedes principle. Has anybody ever heard of that before besides Shelley? Yes, you have heard of the Archimedes. So I don't even really want to describe it because you'll be able to, I'll describe it wrong, and later I'll hear from you. I know I will. But the Archimedes principle, he actually conducted some experiments, and he came up with the buoyancy principle. And it basically says that a ship will float when the water it displaces equals the weight of the ship. So he discovered the buoyancy principle. 200 years before Christ, more than 200 years before Christ, he discovered this principle. That buoyancy of water, that when leveraged, ships actually float. But when you ignore it, ships sink. The Archimedes principle. It was true. It was true when he first discovered it. It was actually true before he discovered it in around 200 BC. It was true when he discovered it, and it's been true since he discovered it. It's a principle that has always applied. Even though people before him didn't realize what it was still true whether they realized what it was or not. They just didn't have a name for it. We're going to look this morning at another principle. And it's called the principle of reaping and sowing. The principle of reaping and sowing. You know that every choice you have, every choice I make, every choice you make has a consequence. There's something that comes out of every choice, every decision that you and I make. So if we make wise decisions, if we make godly decisions, good things come out of it. If we make ungodly decisions, if we make foolish decisions or rash decisions, bad things come out of it. We reap what we sow. Or another way to say that is we actually harvest what we plant. And it's a principle that always applies. Galatians 6:7 says, "Do not be deceived. God can't be mocked. A man and a woman, people, will reap what they sow." Or another way to say it is, you will harvest what you plant. It's a principle that always applies. It never changes. So in other words, you actually reap what you sow. But another part of the principle, which is true, is you actually reap more than you sow. You may sow something small, but you actually reap something much bigger. So you reap what you sow, you reap more than what you sow, and you actually reap it later. Because you know that when you plant something, it doesn't come up right away. So when you sow something, you don't get the rewards right away. So you reap later than you sow. So the principle of reaping and sowing, it's not bad, and it's not necessarily good. It just is. It's a principle that just is. It always is. It always applies. You and I reap what we sow. So the Archimedes principle, if you knew nothing about it, which I didn't until I started to read a little bit about it, or if you knew about it and you hadn't thought about it for years, it still applies. When you leverage the principle that Archimedes discovered, when you leverage that principle, ships actually float. But when you ignore it, they sink. So the same thing holds true to the nature of responsibility. When it comes to responsibility, when it comes to the way responsibility works, when it comes to people playing with the light switches, that's cooler. I don't know if you'll be able to see on the camera, but that's probably no loss either. That's great. I'm fine up here. But you can't see. So the same thing is true. So whoever took responsibility to turn the lights out, some of us thank you, and Russell doesn't. When you think about the nature of responsibility, We all have responsibilities. Every person in life, whether you might say, I don't have that many, I hardly have any, maybe I think I don't have any at all, you have responsibilities. And maybe you might say, well, I have all kinds of responsibilities. I have lots of responsibilities at home, but maybe when it comes to work, well, I'm not a supervisor, I'm a worker, and so I only have limited responsibilities. Maybe when it comes to what you do, maybe at church, you might say, well, I have all kinds of responsibilities. I know people at LifeBridge who have multiple responsibilities, and we're blessed to have many of those in the service in the summer. People who work with kids, I would say kids who work with KidsBridge, and that certainly applies to a couple that I know. I won't mention any names, but no, I won't do that. But you think about that, and they have all kinds of responsibilities. Week in and week out, working with the children, caring for your children, caring for our children. And many of them have other responsibilities as well. So whether you have many responsibilities or you think you have few, you have responsibilities in every area of your life. You have responsibilities to yourself, but you also have responsibilities to other people. The big question is, how do you and I make the most of our responsibilities? How do we make the most of the responsibilities that we have? How do we get the most out of it? We have them. They're not going to go away. I mean, some may come, some may go, but we will always have responsibilities. So how can we make the most out of them? How can we get the best out of our responsibilities? I mean, we all have them. But sometimes we don't take them as seriously as maybe we ought to take them. Maybe we don't give as much as maybe we should. Maybe we don't pay as close attention as maybe it would be best for us to do. So we don't take them sometimes necessarily as seriously as we ought to. But what if we were to take responsibility for the things that we are actually responsible for? So how do we make the most out of responsibility? And that's the question we're going to be considering this morning as we continue. So I'm going to ask the worship team to come. Believe it or not, you and I, who we are today, is actually the result of our past. The choices that we made in the past. Where you are, who you are, where you are today is the result of the choices you've made in the past. So our previous thoughts, our previous actions actually help to determine who we are. Not only that, they help to determine who we become. So if in our life we're making wise choices, we act wisely, it kind of sets us up, gets us ready to make wise choices, wise decisions in the future. But if we're making rash decisions or we're making selfish decisions now, it sets us up for trouble in the future. It's a short-sighted person who thinks only of the here and now. A person who does as little as possible. I remember when I was younger, unfortunately, that described me. I was a short-sighted person. So when I would make decisions, I would only think about maybe the next couple of hours, maybe the next couple of days, maybe the next week, max. But I never really thought long term. And there's a real cost to that type of approach to life. You do actually reap what you sow. And so the person who does that, eventually they find a way to avoid different things. Because we end up with poor quality choices. We end up with the results of poor quality choices. And it impacts our life. The Galatians 6:7 says, "Do not be deceived. God cannot be mocked. A man reaps what he sows, or will harvest what we plant." It describes this unchangeable law, this principle that applies in every relationship, in all of our relationships, in every area of our life. Our family, our work, our friendships, where we go and the things we do for pleasure, it impacts every area of our life, this principle. So it's both a warning. Now, I have to admit that when I was younger, I didn't really pay attention to that warning. And sometimes I may not still, but more often than not now, I do pay attention to that. So it can act as a warning, go, hey, wait a second, you need to think longer term than just what's happening today, just what you want in this minute, or what you might want next week or next month. So it can act as a warning. But for those who are making good choices, it can act as an encouragement. If you're making good choices with your life, be encouraged. If you're sowing good things, if you're planting good things, be encouraged. Every farmer appreciates the meaning of this principle. It's funny, as I was going to search for some things to kind of demonstrate what we're talking about today, I realized pretty quickly that I don't live in the country anymore. The things that I was looking for, I just would have had to go down the road in just out my backyard or down to the neighbor across the street, and I could have come home with all kinds of the stuff that I was looking for. Man, I called places and I went to places, and this is the city. You don't have country things in the city. Well, you have a few, but you don't have many. At least not the things that were in the country where I live. A farmer appreciates the meaning of the principle. You reap what you sow. And he understands that we do reap what we sow. He understands that we do reap more than what we sow. He understands that we reap later. When we sow, we reap later than what we sow. And the principle applies to everyone. It's an irrevocable principle. There's nothing you can do to get rid of that principle. We're stuck with it. It's not good. It's not bad. It just is. Do not be deceived. God can't be mocked. It's actually kind of the root problem for us. This part of the verse. Do not be deceived. God cannot be mocked. It's actually the root cause of careless judgment. It's actually the root cause of careless choices. Maybe an indulgent lifestyle where I have a whim, I want it, I get it. I do whatever I can to get my hands on it. It doesn't really matter who it affects. It doesn't matter how it affects me in the long term. I just want it, I get it. It actually is the root of this indulgent lifestyle. And many people are deceived. I was deceived. Sometimes we're deceived. They don't believe the truth. Or somehow we believe that I can kind of get around this law. You know, I know it applies and I hear it, but I believe in God, but there must be a way that I can kind of get around this principle. Maybe there's some way that I can short circuit this and it'll apply to almost everybody else, but it won't apply to me. Or maybe it'll apply to me in other situations, but I must be able to find a way around it in this situation. Doesn't work that way. It always applies. So to mock God is kind of like thumbing our noses at God. It's like we're trying to outsmart Him. Like it's really foolish thinking. But most of us, many of us, at times in our life, maybe now's the time for you, I don't know. At times in our life, we get caught up in that. We think that, hey, I can get away with this. I can outsmart God. And that's what we try to do. But the Bible says in 2 Corinthians chapter 5, verse 10, it says, "For we must all appear before the judgment seat of Christ, so that each of us may receive what is due for the things done in the body, whether good or bad." So we all face Jesus. Now, last night we had a celebration, and it was a good celebration. As a pastor, I get to do what I call some of my favorite things. I can list some of my not favorite things, but I have some favorite things that I really like to do. That I love to be a part of, that I find it's a privilege to me. And probably the biggest one for me is just being a part of people's lives. And one of the expressions of their lives, their spiritual lives, happens at baptism. And it's not really the baptism itself, because that's not the main event, if you will. The main event is when a person says, you know what, I've been trying to do it my way, trying to figure it out my way. I've been following my plan, and my plan sucks. I'm really bad at setting out the plan. I'm good at failure. I'm good at causing problems. I'm good at those kinds of things. But when it comes to setting the good plan, no matter how good a plan I set, somehow it just doesn't seem to work. And baptism, for me, when I watch people being baptized, it fills me with such joy because they're taking a significant step in their faith. So for some people, just the act of being baptized. I had one woman in my last church. She was a larger woman, and she was a lot of fun. She had a good sense of humor, and she was petrified of water. She was petrified. I think she showered, but I don't know sure she even took baths. She was so afraid of water. And it was weeks before, as we were talking through baptism and all those kinds of things. And she said at one point, she said, maybe I'll do it. But she said, can I wear water wings when I go in the tank? And I said, no. Don't give in to that fear. So when people take that significant step of faith, that's an exciting thing to be a part of. And they're sowing something so vital. They're saying, it's not my way anymore. I'm letting you know it's Jesus' way. I'm not the director. I'm not the leader. I'm not ultimately responsible for my guilt and my shame because Jesus took it all on himself. And now he promises to lead me. I just need to follow. And I will. I'm committing to that. That's an exciting thing. If you and I were to stand before the judgment seat in 5 minutes, I'm praying that doesn't happen. I've got things planned for later on today. But if it does, great. If you and I were to stand before the judgment seat in the next 5 minutes, what would we reap from what we've sown in our lives? What kind of fruit would you and I be able to show from the life that we're living, that we've lived? The truth is we reap what we sow. We reap what we sow. And that might be good news to you. That might be bad news. That might be one of those things you call a mixed blessing. I can see some good in that. I can think, well, there's a few things. I've done one or two good things. But then there's the other part of the blessing, and I've done... So that might be good news to you or it might be bad news. But we do reap what we sow. The good news is for those who have been developing good habits, good practices in their life. So if that's you, if you're in the place and you've been in the place for a while where you've been making good choices, where you've been developing good habits, that's good news to you. That's serious good news. But it's bad news if we're involved in things that God would say are very destructive. They're very damaging to you as a person. They're ungodly. We would call them ungodly things. They're things that are just wrong in God's sight. And he says, when you do these things, they're going to cause big problems for you and the people around you. Things like sexual promiscuity. We go, oh, no big deal. Well, it is a big deal. Why is it a big deal? Because God says it's a big deal. And if I get involved in that type of lifestyle, I end up engaging in something that God says, I created this. This is good. But I set some boundaries for it. And when you step outside the boundaries, when you sow in that way, there will be a harvest that will come, and it won't be good. Bad choices, maybe involved in drugs or alcohol abuse, or maybe it's neglect of your responsibilities, whether it's your family or your work or whatever it is. Maybe you're caught up in those kinds of things. Maybe you're caught up in mistreating others so that you can kind of get ahead. Kind of standing on the backs of the people around you so that you can take that next step. We wouldn't, I was thinking about this, we wouldn't actually plant crabgrass or grade B grass seed, which is what this is. We wouldn't actually plant this if what we wanted were pineapples or cherries or oranges. We wouldn't plant this, would we? Because we wouldn't get what we want. So we wouldn't plant that. We reap what we sow. What we plant is what we harvest. So if we wouldn't plant crabgrass, if we wanted pineapples or cherries or oranges, why would we sow disobedience, expecting to get something good from God? It doesn't work that way. So we reap what we sow, but we also reap more than what we sow. Why do farmers plant seeds? In my last church, one of my best friends was a farmer. In fact, he's now not a farmer anymore. As of late, he's going. I don't know what he's doing with his life now, but he sold his milk quota and he's not going to be a farmer anymore. But I've been there when he's planted and when he's harvested and when he's I've been there when he's done that, particularly with corn, because it was for feed for his cattle. Why do farmers plant seed? They plant seed because they know they're going to get way more than what they actually plant. They know this. Now, there could be things that would happen. There could be drought or things like that. But they know that the principle applies that if they plant a seed, they're going to get way more than what they planted. For example, take sunflower seeds, for example. Now, if you take a sunflower seed, pretty hard to see in this light, hey Russell, wherever you are. If you take a sunflower seed and you plant a sunflower seed, you will actually get much more than what you plant. You will get this plant. Well, actually not this plant. In my search for real sunflowers, guess what I couldn't find in the HRM? Real sunflowers. But these kind of look like sunflowers. And if this were a real sunflower, what we get from this is this. What we get from this is this. Many, many, many seeds come from one seed, which equals one plant. And that plant harvested, there's many seeds. The farmer understands that you reap way more than what you sow. Way more. Take corn, for example. One corn seed. In better light, I can see it. Can you? One corn seed looks like this. Now, in my research, what I discovered was that farmers actually plant 3 in each hole. Now, they expect that something's going to happen to probably 2 of them. The birds, or maybe it won't germinate. So they typically plant 3. So let's even say that there's 3. Okay? 3 of these per hole. Out of these 3 seeds, 1 of them will germinate, and it will grow a plant. And these plants are called stalks, which you cannot find in the HRM, I guarantee it. At least not for another 3 or 4 weeks. But you can find this. And on a corn stalk, from these 3 seeds, you get anywhere from 2 to 5 corn. I call them corn on the cob. That's not what they are. Ears of corn. Okay? And on every one of these, you get about 800 kernels. So from 3 seeds, the farmer knows, he knows that if he plants 3 seeds in a hole, he's actually going to reap anywhere between 1,500 and 4,000 new seeds, new kernels. Does he get it? Does he understand that he actually can reap way more than what he sows? He understands the principle. It works. It's true. It's always true. It's not a good principle. It's not necessarily a bad principle. It just is. It can work to your detriment, or it can work to your benefit, but it's just a principle. It's the same way with sin and righteousness. A small decision to do good or bad. A small decision to do good or bad can reap a harvest. And it will reap a harvest. And it will always reap a harvest that's way more than what you've sown. And it doesn't really matter. Oftentimes we think, well, I had a friend at Bible college. I don't know if I've mentioned this to you before, but his name was Brian. And Brian, every once in a while, would kind of get a bee in his bonnet, and he'd stand up talking to all these young students. And, of course, he was the same age as most of them. And he'd hear students say all the time, it's no big deal. Just a little thing. It's no big deal. Not going to hurt anyone. Just a little thing. Small thing. What's the problem? And he'd get up every once in a while and in a chapel service or when students were gathering, he'd say, you know what? It is a big deal. You say it's not a big deal, but it is a big deal. And it is. So whatever it is that we sow, we reap way more than what we sow. The principle always applies. You can't escape it. I can't escape it. So if it's good, we reap joy. We reap blessing. We reap rewards. If it's bad, we reap unhappiness, sadness, sorrow. It's just a principle, but it always applies. So Jesus used farming or these rural images to kind of plant these pictures, so to speak, in people's minds. So they kind of got it. They could not only hear it, but they could see it. And it's kind of why we try to do a little bit of that here, just to kind of give you a picture. It's not just words. There's a picture that's painted. And that's what Jesus used to do. And he'd say, and really the picture he wanted to paint was when we allow God's Word to produce positive qualities in us, those results multiply. You might sow a little good thing here and a little good thing there, but it multiplies, and it's not even up to you. All that's up to you is sowing what's right and what's good. And God promises, He's created, there's a principle that always applies, that you will multiply, it will multiply, and you will get way more than what you ever sown. Way more. I mean, that's pretty incredible when you think about it. We don't deserve it, but it's a principle. It's not good. It's not bad. It just is. Jesus was talking about that principle, and he said he told them about a parable, and he said a farmer went out to sow his seed, and as he was scattering seed, some fell along the path, and the birds came and ate it up, and some fell in the rocky places where it didn't have much soil, and it sprang up quickly, and because the soil was shallow. But when the sun came up, the plants were scorched and they withered because they had no root. Other seed fell among thorns, which grew up and choked the plants. And still other seed fell on good soil where it produced a crop. So the picture is that kind of as he's going, and I'm not going to do this because they cleaned up this room so nicely, so I'm not going to do this. But the picture is as he's walking along and he's just scattering seed. So what he's doing, it's his life. It's what he does. Wherever he goes, he scatters seed. You never know where it might grow. He knows it'll grow in certain soil, but you never know. There's a chance it might grow somewhere else. So the picture is as he's walking along, he's just scattering seed. And some of it produces a crop. And the crop, Jesus said, there's one, when it falls in rich soil, he said this crop, it produces a crop yielding 100, 60, or 30 times what was sown. So that we sow, we will. We'll sow good or bad. Where we sow, well, sometimes it's good to be wise about that, but really the picture is as we go along, we scatter seed. We sow seed. We plant. And there's a harvest, and it's way more than you could ever, ever, ever imagine. On the other side of the ledger, Hosea the prophet describes the consequences for those who choose wrong or choose wickedness, who choose sin. And he says, they sow the wind and they reap the whirlwind. Have you ever been caught up? Have you ever been caught up in that maybe you're caught up in it now. Have you ever been caught up in that life where, like I'm it's all about me, and it doesn't really matter what I do, whether I do wrong or I do right. What difference does it make? I'm just going to do what I want to do, when I want to do it, where I want to do it, with whom I want to do it. That's my life. And he says that kind of life, when you sow that kind of life, what you reap is a whirlwind. Here's another word for you: chaos. Your life becomes chaotic. It's like a mess. Ever been there? I have. And it's the result of all the things that we've been reaping, or sowing rather. And that's what we reap. We reap a whirlwind or chaos, turmoil, heartache. So we reap what we sow. We reap more than what we sow, but we also reap later. Later. Some people, sometimes, and this actually happened to me, I would think, well, you know what? Hey, things are fine. I'm fine. And so we become deceived thinking, I'm not actually, maybe I won't, maybe I got around it. Maybe I won't actually reap what I've sown. And we're deceived. We believe that there won't be a harvest. That's in the negative. But even in the positive, some people get so tired of doing what's good and what's right and serving and loving and doing all these things and say, what's the point? I'm tired. Thinking that there'll never be a harvest because it's not happening now. But unlike the crops in the field, which do have a timetable, I lived in the country for 8 years, and there is a timetable for the crops. You can mark your calendar. In fact, obviously farmers do, but even people who live, you just know. There's a timetable for those crops. But there's no regular timetable for the harvest that God has for you and for me for the things that we sow in our lives. We don't know when it will happen. Sometimes it will happen a little bit sooner. Sometimes it will come down the road. But the season will come. So if you want to take advantage, if you want to make the most of, if you want to leverage this principle, the principle, it just is. If you want to leverage this principle for your good, for good period, here's what you can do. You can go the second mile now. You might say, well, I did it yesterday. And it's like they didn't even notice. Why would I bother doing it today? In fact, they gave me a hard time because I didn't do it exactly the way they thought I should do it. And I thought I was going the second mile, the extra mile. What did they care? So why would I bother doing that? See, but when the harvest comes later, it's not really about manipulating people's responses and their reactions. It's just doing what's right because it's right. And I'm taking God at His word, and I believe that the principle will apply as I continue to reap good in my life. I will sow. I will harvest good. I will. So go the second mile. Now, you can do more than what is required. You can do the extra. There's so many people that I've met, just in LifeBridge alone, who they just go the extra mile. They're looking for opportunities to go and do more than what's required. They're not doing the bare minimum. You're not doing the bare minimum, any of you. You're looking for opportunities to do more, to do the extra thing, to sow good things. I want to encourage you. You might think that you're doing that for Rob or for me sometimes, and maybe we like it. But you're doing it because God, hopefully you're doing it because God wants you to do it. And there's a reward. God has a reward for you as you go the second mile, as you do more than what is required, as you do more than the bare minimum. You will collect rich dividends. In our prayer time this morning, it was in my notes. It was interesting. In my prayer time this morning, one of the things I had in here was think about things like parenting. I would say about our son and our daughter, I would say, there are things choices that we're making now that they may never, maybe they'll understand it sometime, maybe they'll appreciate it, maybe it'll happen sooner, but maybe it'll happen way later. well, I'm just going to, we just have to make these choices because they're the right things to do. That's it. And the reward may come later. My grandmother prayed for me. She must have prayed a lot. She had to pray a lot. She really did. She actually died when I was 27. And, the day that I gave my life to the Lord, when I was 35, the first person that came to my mind was my grandmother. And I'm here to tell you something. That I believe, I'm absolutely convinced that all the prayers that she sowed later, after she died. Marriage. How about marriage? How about marriage? How about marriage? How about setting yourself aside to serve your partner first? Sometimes I do it, sometimes I don't. Sometimes I sow that good thing, sometimes I sow selfishness. Sometimes I sow me first, sometimes I sow her first. Someday I'll get it straight. Someday I'll get better. I think I'm getting a little better. Don't ask her. Don't ask her. Don't ask her. How about with your home? Have you ever seen a house that's been let go for 5, 10, 15, 20 years? You can see that when neglect is sown into a home, you can see it you can watch it deteriorate. Right? You just see it falling to pieces over time. What about maintaining true peace in your relationships? True peace. I don't mean this pseudo peace, where we just don't talk about it so everything's okay, which is actually just another way of avoiding dealing with our tension and giving the enemy a foothold in our life. What about maintaining true peace in our relationships? If you want to leverage the principle of reaping what you sow, if you confront that tension, if you deal with it, there are rewards. I read one time, a guy said, we have a God-honoring responsibility to deal with conflict in a way that will honor God himself. And if you do that, when you do that, there's a reward. You might go, yeah, I try, but you can't, you wouldn't. You know what they did? You know what they said? And you know what? They just kind of walked away. I tried to do it, they just walked away. And you say, well, obviously that was a waste of time. Didn't reap any reward there. Shows you what he knows. But the rewards come later. Maybe it will happen right away, but maybe it will happen sooner, but maybe it will happen much later. But we do it because it's the right thing to do. A man or woman reaps what he or she sows. I mean, that can be something that encourages you, or that can be something that's kind of scary to you. In Galatians chapter 3, Paul says, if anyone thinks that they are something when they are not, they deceive themselves. Each one should test his own actions. Then they can take pride in themselves alone without comparing themselves to anyone else. For each one should carry their own load. Nevertheless, the one who receives instruction in the word should share all the good things with their instructor. Do not be deceived. God cannot be mocked. A man reaps what he sows, or he harvests what he plants. Whoever sows to please their flesh, from the flesh will reap destruction. Whoever sows to please the Spirit, from the Spirit will reap eternal life. So let us not become weary in doing good. Let us not become weary in doing good. Don't give up. Keep going. Keep praying. Keep loving. Keep serving. Keep sacrificing. Keep going the second mile. Let us not become weary in doing good, for at the proper time we will reap a harvest if what? If we do not give up. You will reap a harvest. What will that harvest look like? Ralph Waldo Emerson said this, and I'm sure he wasn't the only one who said this, but he said, when you sow a thought and you reap an action. Sow an action and you reap a habit. Sow a habit, and you reap a character. Sow a character, and you reap a destiny. It begins with what's going on inside of our minds. All our sins, all our thoughts. You know, it's like sometimes, you almost hear people say it, and maybe we're tempted to say it, or maybe we have said it in the past. Well, I just kind of slipped into it. I just kind of, I was okay one minute, and then I just kind of slipped into that sin the next. No, you didn't. No, you started thinking about it, and then you started to embrace it, and then you started to think about how good it would be, and then you acted on it, and from all of those things that you have sown, there's a harvest. You will reap from what you've sown. So the man who cheats on his wife thinks that it came out of the blue. It didn't come out of the blue. The woman who stole money from her employer, believes that there's no writing on the wall foreshadowing what was going to happen. Yes, there was. All those things that lead up to actually doing it, that's where we cut it off. Jesus said in Matthew 15:19, he said, out of the heart come evil thoughts, murder, adultery, sexual immorality, theft, false testimony, slander. When we act in a certain way, those thoughts have already been alive in my mind. And at some point I've embraced them in my heart, and I will act on it. I will. If I keep going. The physical act of doing something is out of the overflow of what's already happening inside of me. It's already going on inside of me. So what do? Don't think any thoughts. Well, that doesn't work. I mean, I don't want to heard the other day, there's, 3 or however many thousand thoughts we think in a minute. I don't know, it's 3,000 or 4, or who knows what it is, but some astronomical number. I was like, I can't type that fast, I know that. As long as we're living and alive and awake, we're going to think thoughts. So what do? The Bible says in 2 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 5, take captive every thought, make it obedient to Jesus. You take it, you think it, you go, is that right? Is that good? Does that obey Jesus? Would he be happy with that thought? Would God be blessed by what I'm thinking? And if the answer is no to any of those things, then you deal with it right there. Before it becomes a habit, before you start to embrace it, you stop it there. You become strong-willed in what you allow your mind to focus on. You become hardline to what you allow your thoughts to embrace. And you have to become cautious on what you allow your ears to hear and your eyes to see. It's not just an action that's reaped from the thoughts, but it's also a habit, a character, and a destiny. So don't compare yourself to other people. You are you. And I know many of you, and you are all very unique. Very, very, very unique. Some of you are more unique. No. As long as I keep comparing myself to other people, well, you know the phrase I hear the most? Well, I never did that. So-and-so did something that bad. I never did anything that bad. And so somehow we're able to justify what we're doing by saying, well, what I'm doing is not as bad as what other people are doing. So what's the problem? We make excuses and we blame. We talked in week 1 about pie. Don't have any today, David. Ralph, sorry. We talked about owning your piece of the pie, your own piece, in whatever it is that's your responsibility, however big the pie is, and whether your piece is this big, or whether your piece is that big, or whether you think your piece is this small, you own your piece. You take responsibility for your part. That is your responsibility. And don't blame, don't excuse. Galatians chapter 6, verse 9 says, let us not become weary in doing good, for at the proper time we'll reap a harvest if we don't give up. It's always later and greater. I mean, the principle of sowing is not fair, it's not balanced, it's not even necessarily just. It just is. It's not good, it's not bad, it just is. And it always is. What you sow, you'll reap. In 2 Corinthians chapter 9, in the Message paraphrase, it says this, remember, a stingy planter gets a stingy crop. A lavish planter gets a lavish crop. I want each of you to take plenty of time to think it over and make up your own mind about what you will give, about how much you will give, about the types of things that you will give, about the generosity of the heart behind what you will give. Be careful. Think about that. In Proverbs chapter 11, it says, give freely and become more wealthy. Be stingy and lose everything. The generous will prosper. Those who refresh others will themselves be refreshed. The good news is, no matter where you are today, if you look in the mirror and you take an honest look in the mirror, you say, I don't really like where I am right now. And I don't really like very much where I've been in the recent past. Well, there's good news. You can actually begin today to start to leverage that principle for good. Now, you will still reap from what you've sown to date. So it's not a balancing of the scales. Okay? What it is saying, you know what? Today I'm going to start sowing, planting good things from my life. Trusting that God will honor that principle will apply to me. Yes, I will still harvest some bad from the poor choices that I've made, from the bad things I just will. I can't escape it. But there's opportunity. As long as you have life and breath and time and opportunity, you can begin to leverage this principle for your good, for the good of others, for the sake of the kingdom. You can begin to leverage the principle for good. LifeBridge exists to lead people into a relationship with God and His family, to assume responsibility for ourselves and ultimately for others. So in what ways today? I'd like you to think about this. In what ways today? Where are you at? And in what ways would you say, you know what? I want to begin to leverage this principle, to make the most of this principle, to take advantage of this principle, which just is, so it's going to happen no matter what. I want to take advantage or leverage this principle beginning today in this area. Maybe in your thought life. Maybe you need to do some work there. Maybe in your words, the kinds of words that you speak, or they tear people down. Maybe in your actions. Maybe your actions oftentimes are selfish. Maybe you begin to act selflessly. Maybe in the area of your family, your relationships, your co-workers, with your peers, your friends, your church family. I want to encourage you today to consider making a commitment to take a step in even just one of those areas to say, I'm going to begin to sow good seed today. Knowing that I will reap what I sow. I'll reap more, way more. And maybe sooner that I harvest it, and maybe later. But I will harvest it because God promises. And He created this principle, and this principle always works. It always applies. It will always do what it says it will do. I want to encourage you to make a commitment to take a step in just one or more of those areas in your life today. And that's the worship team to come.